when it came to Brexit, farming was very, very much on the table. Of course, one of the big sort of, policies that, the Brexiteers love to sort of criticize was the idea of the common agricultural policy, saying that, oh, it favored, big landowners far too much, and that, post Brexit, we could sort of do a better system and make it better. We can have a better post, Brexit agricultural policy. And yet, the ELMs, which we have seen the subsidies we got from the EU replaced, ultimately have been very, very much savaged by not only farmers, but by the organization that represents most of the farmers here in the UK. That's the NUF, the National Union of Farmers. With Marie Batters, the current president, saying in a recent interview, which we'll just go over some of the comments in a moment, saying, look, we don't understand why we got this. This wasn't what we were asking for. This doesn't give us sort of, a surety and responsibility. And in some cases, you've seen farmers being really confused about the ELM because they want to be farmers. They want to grow food. They want to grow crops. And instead, the ELM doesn't encourage farming. It goes after more environmental land management. And the thing is, you could have done both at the same time. And this is yet another area where I do think the left sort of lets down a lot of areas, because I do not see what the left-wing policy should be on agricultural subsidies. How do we help farmers? Not only how do we help farmers, but how do we help rural communities who, if you've been following some of the statistics, rural communities especially, you have seen a big rise in crime, not only just in rural areas, but on farms as well. What's the lefty answer? How do we, go out and how do we, support these rural communities? And I think this is yet another area where the left really cedes the ground to the right. And that's why you have seen consistently farmers supporting conservatives, because I don't think the left has really put the pressure on Labour or any of, like, the left-wing movements to really support, rural areas and especially what's the predominant, business activity in these rural areas. Well, ultimately, it's farming. Ultimately, the left has not, I think, really supported these communities. And it shows. It shows in the voting. Now, you are seeing, of course, a lot of farmers switch their votes, but predominantly to Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats, of course, post Brexit, really looked at farming, and of course, during sort of the previous election, Lisa Nadley, the former, shall we say, leader of the Lib Dems, should have got her wellies on and been talking to farmers and done everything she could, wearing a pair of yellow wellies, again, being very on brand, to talk about how disastrous 13 years has been to British farming. Because at the end of the day, we need farmers. We need them, and they're a very important part of our economy. Not the biggest part of our economy, but kind of important that we can grow food. And when you've got the EU agricultural policy, which is being the farmers are now getting less and less payments up until I think it's about 2027. I think it finally sort of will finish at the end of that year. The ELMs, farmers really haven't been signing up to it because they're even confused about what exactly they're meant to get from ELMs. So this is yet another good opportunity where I think the left really does fail. And I think there should be a serious thought about rural communities and how we on the left can actually help these rural communities. because I don't see that a lot. I really do not see that a lot. But we're going to go over what um, the NUF leader said, and the president had to say on this, because I think it sort of sums it up once again, how bad this poorly, so we say, thought out policy, and yet again, supposedly another Brexit benefit, that we could change these agricultural policies, but again, not really been that successful. So we'll have a look at what she had to say in an interview with the Times. And we'll sort of have a bit more of a talk about those. So before we do get onto those, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to the Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club as well down below. So what did Marie have to say when she was speaking to the Times? So she said, the focus at the moment is on growing a crop for the environment and not for producing food. I think it is going to be really hard with the cost of living crisis, she said, adding that the consumers are caring ever more about food security. She also criticized the government's failing to build a more equitable system, saying that large landowners are effectively living off the state is not going to wash going forward, she said. This is, again, I think something that should be addressed. I don't think that large landowners, because, again, one of the main criticisms of the EU agriculture subsidy is that too much of this money was going to larger landowners who really effectively didn't need the amount of money they were getting, but they were getting it because they owned large amounts of land. And instead, the smaller landowners were getting locked out, where they could have really used that money. And yet again, we are now really seeing the lion's share of this money going to those larger landowners. And I think she put it very succinctly there, effectively living off the state. And I think you are going to see, I think, a lot of farmers be really, really annoyed about this going forward, especially when you think about the cost of living crisis, especially when you think about inflation. That's really affecting energy, fuel. There has been, even though it doesn't tend to get reported in the news, if you look up things like, the NUF website, or I think it's the Farmer's Guardian, I think it is, which again, nothing to do with the actual Guardian sort of newspaper, but again, it's another sort of organization that sort of focuses on sort of farming news. There have been a number for the past couple of years, very, very big crop failures, which have put a lot of farmers into a lot of problems. And not just crop failures, you're talking about problems with avian flu potentially looking like this. There's talk about blue tongue disease, which is a sort of a cow disease going forward, also really hurting sort of livestock farmers as well. So there are a lot of problems that really the government isn't addressing on this. And also, as I said before, what's the left really got to say about rural communities? They haven't got a lot to say, which I think, as we said before, that cedes land to the right. And here's the thing, those rural communities effectively will elect an MP. And most of that time, as we've seen for many, many years until very recently, they have been predominantly voting Conservatives because they have felt that it is the Conservatives who have been somewhat, talking about rural issues. So, and as we said before, if you want to win an election, you've got to get MPs. If you want to get those MPs, then you've got to reach out to those communities and talk about how they can help those people. And this is something the left has had a massive problem with, especially when it comes to talking about those sort of rural communities. So this was the other part that I wanted to read, because this is the part where she talks about the basic payment scheme, which is sort of the EU development scheme, is of course what they're signing up to now. So At the end of the day, farmers knew what they were getting into with the basic payment scheme. Um, and whether you liked it or not, it was the only way for us to manage our risk, because that was another thing that doesn't really get talked about. When farmers plant a crop, there is a risk management, because you don't know how the weather's going to affect. If there's too much rain, maybe your wheat crop fails. Um, if it's too sunny, that can have an effect. If it doesn't rain enough, if you don't get enough water, there's a ton of things that can go wrong for various different crops based on sort of different weather systems. If it's too wet, if it's too rainy, if the ground becomes too muddy, a lot of different things can happen. And the basic payment scheme was there and helped farmers mitigate a lot of risk, because what if there was a crop failure? Well, they didn't have to worry that too much, because the EU scheme would go, well, we know we're getting this amount of money. If we do have like a crop failure, or our wheat harvest maybe isn't as good, then at least there's something there. There's something there for them. Under the new ELM, it doesn't really prioritize food production. And as I said before, there was nothing wrong stopping them from doing both. But I think in an attempt to try and look different, or at least seem as if they had done something different and listened to farmers, they put out this new post-Brexit agricultural idea, the subsidies of the ELMs, and only about 82,000 farmers. Remember, the entire country, 82,000 farmers have only signed up. That's not exactly a big number of farmers to sign up to a predominantly government-run, UK-run scheme. And especially rephrasing what the NUF president just said, you're going to have a lot of large landowners now effectively living off the state. You can see agriculture. It is a big problem, but I generally have to say this: what's the left going to say about agriculture? What's the left going to say about rural communities and helping rural communities? And you don't tend to see a lot, because predominantly the left tends to talk about cities. And again, it's not that they shouldn't talk about cities or towns, but then you've got all these other seats where they could win and sort of promote things. And it's not like the Green Party is doing favorably in these places either. But as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.